Well, welcome to the 2024 Brown Bagger webinar series. You may notice some rebranding. Historically, we've brought this to you under the National Beef Cattle Evaluation Consortium umbrella, but this year we're bringing it to you under the eBEEF umbrella. Same Brown Bagger webinar series that has been coordinated now for decades, and currently collaboration amongst myself, Matt Spangler here at the University of Nebraska, and colleagues at Kansas State and University of Kentucky, namely Bob Weaber and Dare Bullock. Our overarching theme of this year is future-proofing selection decisions. And as I mentioned, I'm your host, Matt Spangler, faculty member at the University of Nebraska. If you've not yet, I encourage you to visit our website at eBEEF.org, and you will be able to find there recordings of not only this year's Brown Bagger webinar series, but also historic Brown Bagger webinar series as well, and also our sire selection manual, a manual all things beef cattle genetics related, designed for producers and extension personnel in mind. I'm excited to introduce the first of our two speakers today, Dr. Charlie Martinez, who's an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, actually in agricultural economics. Charlie's a native of Texas, completed training at Texas A&M, and has done some really exciting work, again, looking at it through the lens of ag economics, helping us understand how people actually take decisions relative to the selection decisions that they ultimately make. So I think some really illuminating research that Charlie and his colleagues are leading over there in Knoxville. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Martinez to kick this year's Brown Bagger webinar series off.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt. And make sure I got control here. There we go. So as Matt said, I'm Charlie Martinez. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Tennessee in the Ag and Resource Economics Department. Looking at the Brown Bagger series and kind of looking back through some of the old presentations, it's kind of I guess I'm a kind of an oddball when it comes to the presenter list, but I grew up in Texas, jacking around with Simmental and Cimbral cattle, and I grew up in the American Junior Simmental Association. So my background is still around the seed stock operation and kind of that lens of thinking. So throughout my training and my schooling, I've always kind of had that in the back of my mind when it came to understanding consumer preferences, right? So the consumer theory and things of that nature. And I wanted to bring it to the livestock side of things. And so that's what I'm going to present on today. It's understanding bull buying and selling through eye tracking. So just to kind of lay some groundwork, the bull decision is one of the most consequential decisions that a cattle operation makes. And you could, make the argument that consequential could be taken out and put risky or riskiest there instead of consequential. So when folks are out selecting a bull that they're going to end up using in their operation, a wrong decision could be pretty detrimental, right? In the short run, say you pick one with bad temper, or docility is not its best trait. You could end up having some down fences or down gates, and there's some immediate economic impact there. But if you're somebody that is, raising your own replacement females, selecting a bull that ends up having either daughters that are not ideal from a milking standpoint or their feet are not the most ideal, then that also then can have some ramifications from an economic standpoint, not only in the short term, but even the long run way of thinking for a cattle operation. And so, these decisions not only impact the short run, but also the long run of an operation and the overall profitability of an operation. And as I mentioned, about selecting a bull, there, if we put numbers to it, the bull selection plays an outside role in the genetic progress of a herd. If you're, a majority of producers in the U.S. are a one bull herd, where they select a bull, use them, and then move on from him, sell them, salvage him, and then go on to get another one. And so if we think about a typical herd, if you think about it from a one bull selection process every 3 to 4 years, a bull that you select now is also being coupled with the previous two selections that you've made. And so the last three bull selections or purchases that a person makes make up 87.5% on average of the genetics in your calf crop. And so if we break it down into from a visual standpoint, half of the genetics from the sire, a quarter from the dam sire, and then another eighth of that coming from the dam's grandsire. And so if we look at decisions that we make now and kind of projecting forward as people operate in this supply chain, your decisions from 6-9 years ago could impact a producer. And so I often talk about from a cattle operations standpoint, a lot of us get kind of caught in the short term way of thinking in terms of next breeding season or the next two breeding seasons. And I think that if we really look at it from a macro view, it's really decisions 5, 10, 15 years ago could be impacting what's happening right now currently. And so if you've made bad decisions or good decisions, those effects are being felt right now in the current cattle market where prices are the highest we've ever seen. And so if you've been in it long enough, we've seen the good run of 2013 to 2015, but now we're in even higher realm of prices. And so you could either be really benefiting or leaving money on the table. And so whenever we start thinking about how do people make these decisions, because it's such a challenging decision, there's 5 things that we think about that make it such a challenging decision. One is the previous one that I just talked about, which was that the bull selection has an outsized footprint. A bad purchase can hamper a herd in the long term. Our search space is huge. If you're in a given state, you can either buy from your neighbor or you can buy from across the country now with the advances of video marketing and things of that nature. But also genetics, if you think about EPDs and things of that nature, you can compare an animal that you're looking at for your herd relative to the whole breed, and you can find that animal or a group of animals, again, from your neighbor or from someone across the country. Depending upon where you are, there's a lot of traits that matter for overall profitability. So therefore, there's a lot of right answers or right combinations that can lead to profitability for producers. And then it's also, whenever you're making a selection on a bull, is it for, the current market right now, or is it for the future markets of where you think the market is headed? Is it for raising a certain calf crop of females, of replacement type females that you think will be better for you in the future? And so people are constantly balancing these types of questions as they make those decisions. And so whenever people are out there purchasing a bull, we do it in 2 different ways. One is visual inspection, so using our eyes as we visually look at an animal and give some type of appraisal to it. But also we have selection tools, and I use that generically as an all-encompassing type of bullet point there. It could be EPDs, it could be a gain test performance, it could be some type of individual performance that's been adjusted. There's a lot of different selection tools that could go into that decision. And so when people are looking at a bull, it could be, this is just a video, but it could be someone looking at it, in a pen on buying or on sale day. But also, the thing there on the right there that has just a simple snapshot of a catalog there. There's different ways that people can look at all of that information and from a selection standpoint to say if they like that bull or not, or if they want to purchase that bull or not. And so from a selling point, it's when we look at what we provide in terms of information to people buying, do we provide enough information? Is there some information that's not needed? Is there some information that's not used at all? Or are there certain types of information that people use the most that we could actually highlight from a marketing standpoint? And those are the kind of things that I've long thought about. And so when I first got here in 2020, we started working towards getting some equipment and started developing surveys. And then when we hired Troy Rowan here at the University of Tennessee in 2021, that really kicked off this kind of path we've been going down the last couple of years, and we will continue to go down in terms of research to try to understand buying and selling of bulls, and then branching that off into other aspects such as feeder calves and replacement females and things of that nature. And so we've been actually doing multi-year behavioral studies here in Tennessee with colleagues from Auburn and also in other universities. But basically, we started off with how are producers using EPDs was a general question that we wanted to answer. And so I'm going to give you a quick synopsis that kind of lays the groundwork for the most recent research that we've done here in the next 2 to 3 slides. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is coming from a journal article that was written, or lead author was one of my grad students, but we were wanting to answer a simple question. If we're in the seed stock business, does information matter? Does EPDs matter? And kind of the underlining reason for that was we wanted to see if there was one optimism bias. And optimism bias from a theory standpoint is if someone's selling something, they inherently have a bias towards their product that they're selling, thinking that they have a greater value than it truly is, or the market would say it has. And so if we're selling here, the guy on the right-hand side might be saying, I have, this bull here in the middle. That's the next best thing. It's, a semen company needs to be calling me to get this bull, collected so we can sell semen internationally. Whereas a buyer might look at it and say, we're not looking at the same bull. And so we naturally have some type of bias there. And so knowing that we have a bias, we wanted to see if information such as EPDs could actually eliminate a bias in the marketplace. And so we actually designed an experiment where people were looking at bulls. They got genetic information such as EPDs, and half of them got EPDs, half of them didn't. And so they had a video of a bull, and then they were put into a situation where they were a buyer or a seller. And so generalized way of thinking about this study was sellers are consistently less likely to make accurate predictions. Therefore, there was a optimism bias, and they were overvaluing bulls in the marketplace. But whenever everyone is given information such as EPDs, we found that optimism bias is eliminated and not found in the market whenever everyone has the information, whether you're a buyer or seller. As long as you have information such as EPDs, the bias was eliminated. And we also found things such as high-risk participants were, when they were guessing the prices on these bulls or estimating prices on the bulls that they were looking at, they were actually less likely to be correct. So high-risk folks are often more wrong whenever they're estimating the value of bulls. And, if we think about that in terms of the cattle market, if I was to tell you, that here's a bull and I'm guaranteeing he's going to be heifer safe, someone is willing to take on that risk at a given price, whether it's, one of my family members or someone else that I know or someone that I don't know is willing to take on that risk. There is that natural tendency in the agriculture industry to find, or for people to be more risk loving or risk tolerant or risk seeking. And I think one thing that we fail to think about in agriculture is if you're actively operating in agriculture, you're probably more risk loving or risk tolerant than you think you are, because you're at the mercy for the most part to a market that you really have no control over. You make management decisions, but eventually you're sitting there in the market as a price taker, not a price maker. And so you're subject to those types of variances and risk. And one of the key things that we found was participants that indicate that they use genomically enhanced EPDs and EPD percentile ranks with EPDs, they were actually more accurate folks. And so at the end of that, we had done this study in Alabama and Tennessee. In the very last group of sample collecting that we did, we were sitting in Alabama, and we said, hey, we have this eye tracking equipment. What if we put this on someone and kind of test ran an experiment to see if we get any information? And so that kind of led us to what we've been doing the last couple of years. And what you're looking at here is somebody that was in this very first experiment or round of experiments with us, where if you look at the bottom of the computer screen, there's actually 4 of these little infrared sensors there and a camera on top. But what that is doing is actually we calibrate someone sitting in front of that computer, and those infrared lasers calibrate to someone's eyes, and we can actually monitor where they're looking at on that screen. And so then if we did when we did that, we can actually then take an aggregate of a video still shot and see where they were looking at on this animal. And this is just a random selection that I use in these presentations, where we can actually see this person looking at top line, the head, somewhat of his front feet, and then right there around his stifle and the rear right leg, you can see that that's where that person was looking. But if we look at EPDs, we can actually see where this person was focusing while they were looking at this animal, and in particular, what EPDs and where inside the EPD profile they were actually looking. And so for us, it was, okay, this first experiment told us that information matters like EPDs, whether you're buying it or selling. Well, what if we gave EPDs to everyone, and we can actually pinpoint what EPD? So not only can we say, do EPDs matter, but what in particular EPD is the one that is being used quite often, or what groups of EPDs are being used quite often. And so we started this last round here through 2023 and some in 2024 here in the early part, where we wanted to understand what information do producers use, which EPDs get looked at, does order of information matter, and does type of information matter. And I'll kind of dive in a little bit in those last two bullet points to kind of make it more of a clear picture for y'all. But if we look at layouts currently in the marketplace, you can find layouts of various different ways of how people market or explain information on a bull. So for instance, we have one here. It's the sire of the dam. We get 2 generations back. We have some adjusted ratios. We have individual EPDs. We have the indexes for this bull. Then we get to a different bull here where somewhat of a similar information in terms of total information being given, but different layout. But then we also get another variation here where we have a couple of indexes. We have some type of indication of star rating, and then we have the individual EPDs that go along with this bull. And so there's different ways people lay out their information when it comes to a bull and the information provided whenever someone's in the marketplace. And so, how are producers utilizing these types of selection tools? It becomes a kind of a question that we are really wanting to understand. What you're looking at here is a simple snapshot from the American Angus Association that has production EPDs all the way through the index values. And if we think about a layout of a bull, most of the time we end up seeing production EPDs on the left-hand side of a given catalog or a given snapshot, with our indexes on the right-hand side or tucked away to the right-hand side. And our folks like Matt and Bob and other genetics folks have developed these indexes to help make a decision easier for folks. But sometimes we find that indexes are not used, or people don't understand them, or they don't believe them. And so they end up using sometimes just individual EPDs or no EPDs at all. They just use their eyes and kind of their cow knowledge to make a decision. And so if we know that indexes are supposed to make a decision easier or more, direct for a person that's looking at them, or from a marketing standpoint, it's if we want to put these indexes out there, do people use them? We decided that instead of a traditional EPD profile layout, we wanted to invert it. So we put the indexes on the front, and then we put the traditional EPDs that you would see on the left-hand side at the end. So if you think about, calving ease direct, birth weight, weaning weight, that's usually on the left-hand side. We put those to the right-hand side or behind the rest of the EPDs, and we brought the indexes to the front. And so, from with this layout, we end up with a different variation of this experiment. So we have a normal EPD profile, or what we call flipped or inverted EPD profile. And so half of the people got put in the normal, half of the people got put in the flipped EPDs. Well, then within each group, given that the last experiment said that EPD rank actually matters as well, we actually split each one of these into 2 different groups, where half got percent rank and half got no percent rank. And so we ended up with 4 groups in this experiment, with our control being the normal with percentile rank, and then we have 3 treatments that we were comparing and analyzing against. And so in this study, someone would get a picture or a video of a bull, and then they would get an EPD profile there with percentile rank as it was presented in a catalog. And so that somebody would look at this animal. They were all buyers from this standpoint, and they would make an estimation as to what is the value of this bull. And how we got there, when we started thinking about this and how we were starting to progress through this experiment, was could we use information seeking patterns to our advantage? What we meant by that was, if we can do an experiment where someone looks at an EPD profile, regardless of what group they were in, could we figure out what EPDs are used the most in terms of marketing? If Matt or Bob was having a bull sale, could we actually tell them, hey, this is what people actually look at versus what these are the ones that they don't look at? And if we think about those layouts, we can actually trim some of that information down to be the most efficient that can be used by someone that's actually buying. And if we can get some type of increased accuracy in terms of bull price estimation by folks in this experiment, that then can also lead to better judgment. Better judgment could also lead to more efficient decision making in the actual real world. And so what we did was we ran an experiment where we took a sample out of Tennessee, Alabama, and West Virginia. And what we did was we did it at Tennessee Cattlemen's Association, Alabama Cattlemen's Association, and West Virginia's bull sale day, or they have a sale up there, and they did a field day, and we went up there and took our equipment, and we actually collected samples up there. And so I keep saying they're estimating bull prices and all this, market price. And so what I want to do right now is kind of clear, kind of make it more clear. Participants in this study saw 18 bulls. They saw 6 Angus, 6 Simmental, and 6 Hereford bulls. And the bulls were actually sold in a real sale, and they correspond to the sale date and year that you're looking at there. So Angus, all 6 came from a October 2022 sale, and we got the variation in quality based on $M. The 6 Simmental bulls came from an October 2022 sale here in Tennessee, and we actually got quality variation on the API index. And then on the Hereford side, it came from another Tennessee sale in November of 2022, and we got our quality variation based on the BMI. And so from that standpoint, what I say by quality variation, we had 2 low quality bulls, 2 medium or average quality bulls, and 2 high quality bulls for each one of these 3 breeds. And so folks would come in, they would do what we call a training session, where they saw 3 different bulls go, on their screen, or they saw 3 bulls each individually going across their screen. They saw their EPDs, and then they would estimate the price. And then after they were training, they would get into the 6 Angus, 6 Simmental, and 6 Hereford. And they were actually told kind of the market setting, and I'll explain that here in a minute, but they would estimate the price of what that bull sold for in the market, and they were told if they were right or wrong. And so this is kind of what it would look like. I'll see if it works. This is just a snapshot of what it would look like with someone looking at the result of a bull after they estimated the price, and they were told if they were plus or minus $500. If they were plus or minus $500 of what the true market price was, it was considered an accurate price projection, a prediction. And if it wasn't, then they were considered inaccurate, and they actually found out the actual price along the way. One thing I want to highlight here is in the very first experiment that I explained, they weren't told the range of prices. We kind of just threw them out there and saw what happened. In this experiment, we actually told them the range of prices that the bulls would fall in. So it kind of gave them a min and a max to understand and be utilizing in the experiment, which would be equivalent to market reports or some type of sale catalog report that people would look at in the actual real world. And so this is what it would look like here. Somebody looking at a bull just visually, it's a quick snapshot just for sake of time, but they would look at the bull, they could look at the EPDs, and that little cursor there is their actual eyes, and we could watch what they did with their mouths and so forth. And this is explaining if they were plus or minus $500, it was considered an accurate prediction. And in experimental economics, we like to have a binding mechanism. And so everyone that took this or that participated was guaranteed $15 for their time. But if their prediction for a randomly selected bull was correct, they actually got an extra $10 cash. So they would walk off with $25 potentially for about 15 to 20 minutes of their time. then they would answer survey questions. And so what you're looking at here is the summary stats for everyone that was in this experiment. Whoops. And the one thing I want to highlight to you is if you look at the uses EPD, genomically enhanced EPD, or phenotype or EPD rank, you can see we kind of get a mixed bag of results. 80% of folks out of the 168 said that they actually use EPDs. We dropped down to 50% for genomically enhanced EPDs. We pick up to almost 91% that for people that indicated that they use their eyes in the phenotype of an animal. And then with EPD percentile rank, we drop back down to around 63% approximately. And so, people are indicating that some that use these tools, majority use EPDs and use their eyes, whereas we have more advanced things such as genomically enhanced or EPD percentile rank. Basically 1 out of 2 are using that. Comparing that to previous studies, this is the first one that we did, we had similar results. Basically people, 3 out of 4 will use EPDs. Then we drop down to 1 out of 2. A lot of people use their eyes and physical characteristics. And then we drop back down to 1 out of 2 that actually use EPD percentile rank in their selection. But I mentioned earlier about risk tolerance. On average, people in the previous study were actually more risk-seeking than the average person. And if we go back to this study, we actually have a risk tolerance of 6.39 out of 10, which means people are actually more risk tolerant again in our sample. And so getting to the accuracy, just for the overall results of this study that we've done over the last year, there you can see the type of treatment that was by group. And if you look at the average accuracy of each group, the highest out of all 4 groups was the inverted profile, so the flipped EPDs with percentile rank, compared to what we would consider the control, which is regular profile with percentile rank of 20.57%. We actually saw increased accuracy of estimation by almost 3% when we inverted the EPD profile and they still had the percentile rank. But if we look at it in terms of the highest selling bulls versus the lowest selling bulls, what you're looking at here, the 6 highest selling bulls, for the highest valued bulls of 8,500 and 7,500, the accuracy of the inverted profile the inverted EPD profile with rank, we actually found that the highest was with that treatment versus the control, where regular with percentile rank was 0% and only 2.7% with the second highest selling bull there, bull number 2. And so from the high end way of thinking, we actually see that the layout change actually had dramatic increase in accuracy. If we look at the 6 lowest value bulls, bulls 1, 2, 3, and 4 there, we see actually a really high accuracy mark there with the inverted percentile rank of 45, 20, 40, and 47.5% accuracy. To put that in perspective, the very first study that we ever did, accuracy was less than 20%. So the inverted profile with percentile rank, we actually are finding that we can actually double our accuracy with that type of layout versus the traditional layout that people usually use. And so if we look at the distribution of these guesses, we can see that we still got a distribution that's pretty similar across the board regardless of the treatment group. But with inverted and percentile rank, we actually have there in this bottom left-hand box, we actually have a higher realm of accuracy there and kind of left-leaning a little bit. But if we actually kind of look at it differently, and we look at the distribution in terms of absolute difference, and if you remember, I said plus or minus $500 was considered an accurate prediction. This red box would be considered the accurate prediction. So we had 16% of people be what we'd call bullseye. And as we work our way through in $500 increments, we have folks here in the second column and the third column that were within $1,000 or $1,500 of the true price in absolute terms. And those first 3 columns represent over 50% of all of the samples. So people, they were within, $1,500 pretty regularly throughout all 168 samples of folks. but what can get us closer to that red column? And so we did some economic modeling, and what we found was these are just the statistically significant variables. If the average bull price, if we put a higher valued bull in front of people, that actually decreased their number. So in this sense, we want a negative number, which takes us closer to zero, or narrowing that mispriced guess. So higher priced bulls, our folks were almost $525 better at guessing than low priced bulls. High guessers, so people that were consistently in their behavior always overshooting, it costed them about $500. If you were an Angus breeder in our experiment, they were actually off by another additional $125. But here's the interesting part. For people that said that they use EPDs or genomically enhanced EPDs, using that information actually decreased or helped their guess by $110 almost. And if they use physical characteristics, it helped make their guess better by almost $270. And if people were confident in their overall behavior with their estimation, and they felt confident, that actually that confidence brought their guess down by $720. If we put high genetic bulls, you remember I told you the variation based on those different indexes. High genetic bulls, we found we had a hard time of folks kind of pinning those down and actually increased their guess by $1,000. Low genetic bulls brought it down by almost $481. So for me, when I see that, what that tells us is that our folks in our sample were actually really good at identifying low quality bulls. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave that up for interpretation. But males were better than females in our sample. And if you were full-time or if you were retired, your guess actually got worse later on. But the most important part was, here's what people looked at whenever they were looking at bulls. What you're looking at on the left-hand side are inaccurate guessers. If you're looking on the right-hand side, those are actually people that were extremely accurate in their prediction. And the one thing I want you to focus on is the inaccurate people really just didn't look much at the bull. And some of that is due to they weren't an Angus breeder or they weren't a Hereford breeder. But the folks that were accurate, look at where they look there. They actually look at the tail. So the left-hand side in both of these are indexes, and the right-hand side of these are actually the traditional production EPDs like calving ease, birth weight, weaning weight. They focused on those tail ends quite a bit. They still looked throughout the profile, but their focus points was on the bull itself and physical, but also those tail end EPDs. If you look at other accurate predictions, you kind of see similar trends, but the most common thing that's kind of interesting is the middle, what I'll call the middle EPDs, were looked at but not really focused on altogether. And so for us, thinking about layouts, maybe this is information overload, and knowing that we look at things that people are showing us with their eyes, maybe there are certain EPDs that we can cull out of our layouts, just like CEM, milk, $EN, marbling, things of those natures, of that nature. People are telling us that they don't look at that. Maybe we then can rethink the way we do these types of layouts. And so takeaways: layout matters for accuracy. If we are thinking about it from a selling point, indexes do help. It seemed to us, and the research is showing that having those indexes, first thing that they see, actually helped with accuracy. So they actually could use that information. Increased information usage. Folks using as much information as they can actually have increased accuracy in the marketplace. So if you're buying a bull, use all the information that you can. If you don't understand it, try to understand it the best you can, because the information is there to help you. And for us, it lays groundwork for future research in terms of replacement female selection, feeder calf selection, and things of that nature. And these are just kind of the way we're thinking. What you're looking at here is a different layout of a bull. That is, you have a picture. You actually have his individual performance there in those gray boxes on the right-hand side of the photo. And we actually have the EPD profile there on the bottom. And we've actually done some studies with Zoetis last year at Angus Convention, where we're starting to look at different layouts, and does that individual performance actually matter? And if I have it here, here's what an actual usage and visualization of a bull looks like right there. And so with that, I'll take any questions. Matt, I don't know if we're going to wait till the end. I know we said we'll use a QA box, but if there's any questions, I'll take those now. If not, thank you for having me, and hopefully I made it as clear as mud on the economic side.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. And if there are questions, yes, please use the Q&A box. There's a question that came in, Charlie. What about pedigree? Is that something that uh, you looked at in terms of their decision making?
So we have not isolated on pedigree. In particular, just because we're trying to focus on EPD's usage in the experiments. I think that pedigree is probably always needed to be used anyway. It's kind of, to me, it's one of the things that always absolutely probably should be in a bull's I guess information. But we have not specifically looked at pedigree at all when it comes to the experiments.
Another question, did the percentile rank of the EPD influence how much people looked at each EPD? An example, would people look at yearling weight more if it's in the top 10 percentile versus breed average or lower?
The simple answer is yes. The exact amount of time, that's one of the things that we're actually teasing out right now. One of my undergrad researchers is using this as a project for her undergrad thesis. So we're actually pinpointing the time between how they looked at EPDs, but also if you remember, the the pattern was important to us to understand. How did they go through the EPDs? And so that's not only the pattern but also time change given is what we're uncovering right now. Those results will be done. They have to be done by February because we're going to present that at a conference. So we'll have those explicit answers shortly.
Great, thanks, Charlie. One comment, not a question per se in the Q&A box, was that one of our listeners once heard from someone that EPDs didn't work in that state, and unfortunately, whoever made that comment was simply misinformed. EPDs work regardless of the state that the buyer lives in. So I handled that one for you, Charlie. Another question, do you have plans to expand this and see if this holds up regionally or if focus changes based on geographic region?
So the short answer is yes, and we are actually going to be in Iowa in December running one of these experiments at the Iowa Cattlemen's Association meeting. And Matt and I have talked about trying to, go to Nebraska and run similar experiments there too, because I do think that there's a regional impact. Folks that are maintaining ownership, through the feed yard would have a totally different perspective than someone that's a cow-calf person. And in the Southeast, we're a net exporter of feeder calves, right? Like most people worry about what happens on the scales when they're at 600 pounds and that's it. And so there definitely has to be a geographic difference, and I want to be able to measure that. So yes, that's the next logical step as well in terms of this research. Good question.
Great. Well, thank you, Charlie, and feel free to put additional questions in the Q&A box. Charlie's going to hang on with us through the remainder of this webinar, but we're going to go ahead and switch gears a little bit to our second speaker, Dr. Bob Weaber from Kansas State. Certainly somebody that I would assume the majority of the audience knows of and has heard from before. One of the co-creators of this webinar series. And Bob's going to visit with us about the general idea of bull buying and how it's an investment in the herd's future. So with that, Bob, I appreciate your willingness to do this, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate the opportunity to present to the group, and really appreciate we had I think a record number of attendees register for this year's Brown Bagger, and really appreciate that. And I think demonstrative of the impact this particular series has in the train the trainer and professional development circle. Particularly in our extension audiences. And so we're delighted to have you all here. And my topic today really, when I started off putting the slides together and some ideas for it, had maybe a little more sort of technical and nitty-gritty numbers sort of approach. And as I got thinking about it, I sort of shifted gears a little bit to a bit more of a kind of philosophical talk, and primarily to kind of both capitalize on some of the comments that Charlie made relative to the importance of sire selection, but help bridge that into some of our follow-on speakers' topics through the rest of the Brown Bagger. And so the talk, as we sort of flesh it out, really is a bit more kind of strategy, tactics for bull selection and thinking through this whole process. And so as extension educators and others involved in providing consultation and advice to commercial producers, how might we think about that specific selection strategy, and maybe step back a little more to kind of a 30,000-foot view versus an individual animal sort of perspective. And so, I really appreciate the work that Charlie's doing to help us understand how producers use the information that we provide in sales catalogs to make their selection decisions. But we also need to make sure, as we provide advice to them, that they're making that decision in the right context. And so we've got a number of opportunities to influence that decision making. And so we'll kind of jump right into the talk here. If I can get the slides to advance. There we go. One of the first things, and I really like this quote from old Al Einstein, that's no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. And one of the, I think, challenges we face in our business today is a bit of information overload sometimes for our commercial producers to sort of make sense of all the data that's thrown at them, and a bit of a moving target, right? So if we think about the cyclicity of the beef market, and depending on where you're at in that process, from a timing standpoint, maybe different things are emphasized in the market space. Certainly today in the beef market, heavy carcasses are really valuable in the system because of relatively short supply of feeder and fed cattle through our system. But that won't always be the case. And so how do we kind of future-proof ourselves a bit from some of the swings that we see, and maybe more importantly, how do we tie back to the cow-calf sector? So many of you have heard me speak before, and I kind of have a passion for the cow-calf side of our business, and making sure that we make sustainability and profitability key components of our breeding objectives in those systems. And I think that means that we really need to elevate our game, if you will, a bit, so that we're not stuck in the same consciousness that got us into some of the challenges that we have today. Matt referenced the eBEEF website. I'll reemphasize a great set of resources for our extension community and beef producers at large, in particular the Beef Sire Selection Manual, a great opportunity for additional educational, and certainly I think maybe Matt mentioned this, we do have a pretty good inventory of these in print. So if you would like a copy or a set of copies to distribute your extension programming, be sure to reach out to us and we'll get those in your hands. Okay, so a little bit of an overview, and I've touched on a couple of these topics already, but I want us to start thinking about really this systematic selection as part of our sustainability strategy for our production system and our operations. So we know that the breeding and genetics component isn't the only thing at play in a cow-calf operation. Certainly, there's a number of other managerial opportunities and interfaces that we could talk about. Of course, we're sort of leaning into the genetic space here, but recognize that it has long-term importance, right? So I kind of talk about this as short play, long play opportunities, and some of those, if we think about the impact a sire has today, if we keep replacement heifers out of that particular sire, and then daughters out of that mating, perhaps. We've got a long time impact in our operation. So we need to use the best tools and science available. And Charlie, I'm really encouraged by some of the results that you shared. Matt and Darren and I, through a couple of opportunities back in the mid 2000s, early 2010s, conducted a couple of surveys. And utilization of EPDs wasn't as high as it is today. And so I think we're making stepwise progress in implementation of the best science and using the tools that really work to make genetic improvement in our cow herds. And commercial producers are understanding and using those tools. And I think that's a really great piece of data out of your work. So as we think about the rest of the talk, I want to kind of help provide maybe some questions that we can ask as educators and counselors for commercial producers to keep that sort of impact in the sustainability space and profitability space at the focus, because it's easy to get distracted from a lot of the things that are going on in the day-to-day, to step back into these managerial kind of decisions and spend time thinking about them and doing the homework required to make those really good high-level decisions. That said, we can also overcomplicate this, right? So being able to understand the stepwise process, I think really helps simplify that and makes this a bit more tractable for implementation. So leverage points that I want to kind of highlight as we think about our breeding decisions for a commercial cow-calf operation is really first around aligning selection criteria with a breeding objective and our marketing endpoint. And I won't go further into that because I'll steal a fair bit of Matt Spangler's thunder from next week's talk that he's going to give. But a really key component that sometimes we see producers making a set of selection decisions along things that they perceive as important that really in their production circumstance are of significantly less importance than other things. And so they kind of get off track a little bit. And so Matt will kind of help us focus on that component. Another idea that I think is coming of age in our business, particularly for medium and large size producers, is starting to think about how do we separate the maternal and terminal mating decisions. Certainly if we have just a handful of cows, this is a really difficult thing to do. But if we have a sizable number of cows where we can peel off a group of aged cows, say, and use them in strictly a terminal sire mating, we can change the value proposition quite a bit in both the maternal side and the terminal side of our selection decision by using different bulls to get there, right? We know there's lots of antagonisms between the terminal and maternal traits in our business. And we should start trying to exploit those in combination with strategies to leverage heterosis and breed complementarity. So I like the phraseology, if you will, of selection for environmentally adapted cows and market targeted calves. And so the separation of the maternal terminal decision certainly facilitates that in a more convenient way. And I want to point to Dr. Dave Wallman's talk next week as well. He's going to talk about the nutritional and cost implications of differences in cow size and lactation as it relates to our cow-calf system. And I also like to highlight Dr. Lallman did a great talk at our BIF meeting over the summer that had a real maternal kind of cow focus to the whole conference, and Dave did a keynote kind of job. It was fantastic. I encourage you to go check that out as a resource too. Lastly here, using the best tools. And again, Charlie's result here is that we're making some significant headway, but we need to continue to make sure as new tools come along that we get those adopted and we continue to help people focus on the right tool for their production circumstance. So they do buy the right bulls, right? So at the end of the day, there are a lot of bulls in the market space. How do we help them make the best decision for their individual operation and enterprise? And to that end, we'll talk at the very end a little bit about kind of some sale day strategy that I think kind of helps simplify that process a bit. So I talked earlier about the significance of the sire selection decision, and I think this illustrates it quite well. If we look at the three animals in purple in this pedigree, it's the sire, his sire, or the paternal grandsire of animal X here, and animal X's maternal grandsire. Those three animals account for about 87.5% of the genes in that pool on average, right? So we know via genomics that we can have some separation from those expectations of quarter inheritance from the grandparents. We know that sire and dam both obviously contribute half, but we can adjust the paternal grandsires and granddams a fair bit. But on average, we know that those three animals contribute a large portion of the genes that flow into our herd. And because bulls produce more calves than in their lifetime than their female counterparts do. They have a outsized, I think maybe was a word that Charlie used, I like that, impact in our herd. And because of that, we are justified in spending a fair bit of time making a really good decision and making sure that, as I call them, that they're winners, because we have to live with the outcome of that decision moving forward in our operation. Under the presumption we're not under a 2-year time horizon, these genetic decisions have lasting impact in our herd. And if you don't know where you're going, any path will do. But I think most of us have an objective that's fairly well defined, and certainly we encourage folks to refine that with some additional kind of laser focus. But making sure you have a plan and that you stick to it's really important. And given all the information that we have available in the business today, sometimes it's easy to become overwhelmed, right? It's a little like the herding the cats thing that we've got going here. There's lots of peripheral stuff coming at us. And I encourage us to really step back and maintain focus and simplify all we can, because at the end of the day, the things that are simple and become habit and repeatable in our operation are the ones that have lasting impact. And so making a good disciplined decision making over time is really important. And it gets you to a happy spot. This is my happy spot. This is a little group of cows my family has here in Kansas. And I want the operation to be profitable. But I also get a lot of value out of spending time with my family and going out and seeing our product, right? And I think many producers feel the same way. It's part of our lifestyle. It's part of our legacy. And so we do need to pick our path carefully, right? Because we can get way off track if we're not careful. Here's an equation that I use a lot to illustrate a point, and that it's that at the commercial space, our selection decision is only part of the deal, right? So phenotypes in the commercial space are what drive productivity and profitability in many ways, and they're obviously influenced by both genetics and environment. We can tear apart the genetics pieces into the additive and non-additive components, or the stuff we use EPDs to select for, the additive bits and indexes, the non-additive or the heterotic or heterosis effects that we exploit in our system. And those are all important. But don't lose sight of the importance of management and genetics within a specific context, right? So we know that, for example, environmentally adapted cows require different kinds of cows in different places in the country. And so understanding that environmental interaction, both managerially and the broader weather and forage availability, and those sort of things that we think about from an environmental perspective, all influence the phenotype of our animals. And ultimately, we have to sort out what is the path forward to get those cows that really work for us. And to that end, this slide's mostly a placeholder to remind me to talk about the importance of selecting for the things that are really heritable, and also not overlooking the things that aren't so heritable. If they have economic impact and you've you've probably heard many, Matt and Dare and I talk about economically relevant traits. Depending on your production circumstance, there may be a whole set of things that are really heritable that aren't economically important to you, given your production and marketing endpoint. And so it's important to get focused on the things that are important in that economic and biological context, and also recognize that there are some traits of economic importance that we don't broadly have EPDs for. So in some cases, feet and leg structure or udder quality, we have a number of breeds that have pushed into that space, but there's also breeds that haven't. And so utilizing the phenotypic records and information from our seed stock vendors can help us navigate that a bit, because there's a number of those traits that do have at least modest heritability that we can use some visual appraisal to help guide us along. That said, if there's an EPD or index available that captures that information, we should preferentially use those tools over strictly visual appraisal. Excuse me. And it's also important that we select for the right stuff, right? So you get what you sow. EPDs do in fact work, as Dr. Spangler so eloquently pointed out earlier, and they generate response to selection. And so depending on what you pour in dictates what you're going to get out. And so at the end of the day, if you're using terminal indexes and terminal sire selection in your system, you're going to get a response in terminal traits. So things we might think about in terms of, say, carcass weight or marbling EPD. But at the end of the day, maternal traits, and you're keeping replacement heifers back out of those decisions, we're not going to see the progress that we want to see. And so maintaining focus on the right selection criteria is really essential here to make the tools work in your favor. And so, if maternal traits are important for you, you actually got to select for them, right? You got to put them in the selection criteria and make that part of the priorities in your system. And I point that out as a way to segue into this slide. This is the economic forecasting results from a study that Dustin Ahern did. It's a bioeconomic simulation that he generated for cow-calf production here in Kansas, and looks at the differences here between sires of different genetic potential for cow size and the resulting economic performance in terms of median annual return per grazing acre here in the Flint Hills over a 20-year time frame. And those production systems favor smaller cows. So the cow weights here, apologies, this was a graph that came out of the publication that went into the peer-reviewed journal. So these are in kilograms. So the 454, that's a 1,000-pound cow. The 771 kilogram, that's a 1,700-pound cow. And so, in the idea of this broad selection perspective, maintaining and developing an understanding of what actually drives economic performance in the cow-calf operation is really important, and making sure that we preserve that in our decision-making process. One way to help facilitate that is actually using a customized selection index. So Dr. Spangler and I have both talked a fair bit over time about iGenDec. It's a decision support tool. Matt led the research team in development of this platform that's now deployed by the Beef Improvement Federation and being utilized by a number of breed organizations to develop generalized indexes, but certainly has the opportunity and capability to model and manage selection decisions from individual production circumstances. And this really helps us drive into and lean into the traits that have specific economic importance in our particular economic and production circumstance. And so a helpful way to sort of guide decision-making more effectively. That said, there's also a huge number of breeds that have also pressed into the selection index space, which is, I think, a really useful tool for commercial producers to not only make a more efficient and effective decision, but also to simplify the process, right? So if we rank bulls on a specific index, it provides and manages the trade-offs between, slight improvements in one trait versus another. It handles all of those quite effectively, and I think can make our breeding decisions much more effective, and our purchasing decisions more effective, right? We can understand then, based on differences in the index, what the expected difference in mating value is for each of those bulls over time, and use that to influence our investment, if you will, how much we spend on a bull. If a bull's only going to add, say $500 in expected additional profit over his lifetime, does it merit spending $4,000 or $5,000 additional money to buy him? No, it doesn't, right? So helping put these economic purchase decisions in context is another really useful attribute of the index technology. I also want to make sure that, as we think about a breeding system and breeding system design, we can't get to the individual bull space at the beginning of the decision and then have to go backwards and think about our breeding system. It's breeding system first and the breeds that go into that, and maintaining focus on the value of maternal heterosis in particular has to happen first, and then the individual animals are selected underneath that as a construct, and plays a really important role in getting things right. If you're in a planned crossbreeding system, making decisions that are harmonized against that plan is really critical, and avoiding seat of the pants, spur of the moment decisions at a sale to buy a particular bull because the one you wanted wasn't available is really high risk. And so making sure you've got a plan to leverage heterosis is really important. The mating system goals, again, though, and you'll see there's this sort of cross-threading, if you will, of a variety of objectives that help point us towards this integrated kind of perspective. And it's, how do we optimize the utilization of calf and maternal heterosis? We could put paternal heterosis in here as well. So the value of a crossbred sire in terms of settling capacity and longevity and so forth. How do we leverage breed complementarity to, again, match cows to their production environment? So making sure we've got the right breeds represented in the cow side, mated to bulls, then the optimized value on the calf side as they go into the market space. You can have the same breeds, but if you don't put them in the right space, you don't get to extrapolate the optimal value out of those breeding decisions. So making sure you think through which breed goes where is really critical. Thinking through the market consequences of those decisions and the type and kind of calves that get produced and the trade-offs that go with that also really, really important. At the end of the day, though, it's critical for cow-calf producers to recognize that they can have both the additive genetic value that's in play from EPDs and selection index, and select to use and implement crossbreeding systems to leverage breed complementarity and heterosis simultaneously. Those aren't, mutually exclusive events. There's no law that says we can't do both of those at the same time. And in fact, in today's competitive environment, the producers that are really maximizing profit have figured out that combination of strategies and objectives to make sure that they're hitting on all cylinders relative to not only the cow side of their business, but how do I produce a set of calves that really ring a bell in the market space as well? And there's obviously trade-offs between those, and finding that happy ground takes work. Okay. So encourage you to sort of think about, the breeding system design has some overarching objectives and strategies that we might deploy, if you will, and thinking about, profits and premiums, right? How do we add value to the product that we produce, but not lose sight of the profit drivers in our system, and recognize that, cost plays a key component in the profit equation, and that revenue by itself is a pretty poor proxy for herd level profitability. So the systems thinking here is really, really important to making that good decision stream. Obviously, herd size plays a huge role in the contextualization of which breed system or breeding system makes sense. What kinds of bulls might we deploy? Do we need purebreds? Can we leverage hybrids? That sort of approach, I think, is really important to think through. And last but not least here is certainly, how do you manage replacement heifers? Are you building those internally? Are you sourcing those from a third party? Are you buying bred cows? Are you doing replacement heifers? What's the strategy there, and making sure that our system accommodates that's really important. We've talked a lot about environment. Certainly it presents in a number of ways constraints, certainly elevated feed costs and labor and fuel costs exacerbate that in our current inflationary kind of environment. I saw some numbers the other day from one of our new cow-calf budget forecasts, and annualized cow costs over $1,000 a cow. Kind of makes your head spin, but it also emphasizes the importance that we step back and think about, how do we use genetics to control some of those differences in performance that have influence in the cost space as well. Okay. I want us to think again, we talked about the maternal terminal decision. How do we separate that? What are the advantages of that? Certainly getting out of a single breed mentality allows us to not only leverage heterosis and breed complementarity, it may enable us to do this maternal terminal split and really make decisions that are more focused and ultimately more profitable. And so I want, if you have an opportunity to think about that from a design perspective, I think it's one that's really worthwhile. And as we kind of wrap up here, I just want to again emphasize the importance of sire selection turns out to be the last thing in this whole chain of decisions, but it's got lasting impact. Again, over 80% of the gene flow in the herd over time is attributable to sires. And so think about ways that we want to, either select individual progeny from a particular set of matings. So maybe it's replacement heifers that we want to emphasize. The pedigree of a certain lineage, DNA parentage is relatively inexpensive. Might be a way that we assure that the heifers we retain are out of, say, an AI mating strategy. Lots of different ways we can tackle that, but a really useful tool that's relatively low cost. And lastly here, I think we're clearly in the time where genomically enhanced EPDs are the currency of the realm. And as a bull buyer, I can't imagine going into the market space today and making a $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 investment in a genetic package that didn't have a genomic test behind him. That information is equivalent to basically that sire's first calf crop across all traits for most of the breeds now that are genomically testing. It's a massive amount of information, and one that I think, quite frankly, as customers or consumers of products, we ought to expect from our seed stock vendors. Okay? And it's a really, really important tool. I want to wrap up with this last slide, one that I've written a couple of articles that were surprisingly popular, at least surprising to me that they were, because they're real practical sort of things. And one of them's obviously doing your homework before the sale. Don't be the purchaser that shows up in time for the barbecue sandwich immediately before the auction and just goes and buys bulls. Take time and get to know your seed stock vendor, acquire the data in advance, use that information to make a decision. I like to use selection index that's aligned with my breeding objective as the first sort on the bulls to populate a list that's about 3 times as long as the number of bulls I actually need to go buy. And I've been a bull producer and a bull buyer. I still am involved in buying bulls for the university for use at a couple of our outlying stations. And so I got to go use all the data too. And so developing a strategy and tactic that allows us to not only understand the genetics that are coming in, but we also have a budget, right? And so we've got to stay in that budget, and helps us figure out what bulls we might be able to purchase. And so this 3 times or 3 times as many bulls as you actually need to buy I have found gives us enough cushion to really go through and make a good purchase without having to make a spur of the moment decision in the bleachers from a list of bulls that I didn't even consider. Right, so facilitated by getting to the sale side early and doing some work to sort off bulls from that list that have, maybe I don't like the feed on, maybe the attitude's not quite what I like, maybe he's not the right color, whatever. That gives you some room to cull a few bulls off the list. And then compare it to the sale order, right? So the challenge, I think, in a lot of spaces is that the commercial guys are competing with seed stock vendor or seed stock producers for the frontline bulls. The first, 20% of the bulls have an opportunity in many cases to go to another seed stock producer. If you have to compete with them from a budget standpoint, that's really hard to do. And so I have Cadillac Taste, Chevrolet Budget. And so I can go through my list of, the 3X number of bulls and, and invariably I find, I've got 2 or 3 bulls that are in the first 5 in the sale. I can help make them bring a lot of money, but I'm probably not going to take them home. And so helping sort of sort through that mentality. So when I'm sitting in the bleachers, bidding on bulls, I've got an opportunity to make a really informed decision. So I go home with genetics that are going to be long-term positive impactors in my system versus detractors. So with that, Matt, I'm glad to answer any questions. Hopefully we get a few. I do see one here in the chat already. So we'll look forward to getting through those.
Great. Thank you, Bob. I think that was a really nice overview, but also, as you suggested, a bit of a prelude to what may be coming next. I know we're over on time. We'll try to handle maybe just a couple of quick questions. One for you, Bob. What selection index do we use if we're in need of both terminal and maternal traits where we raise our own replacement heifers and retain ownership through slaughter? Second part of that question, would you use composite bulls?
Yeah, great question. This particular production circumstance where you're in a sort of a terminal product out the back end, but keeping replacement heifers, I think is the most challenging quadrant to live in from a selection standpoint. You've got kind of all of the antagonisms working against you, but indexes that are holistic in their view. So there'd be a number of them available out in industry. The one that kind of comes to mind is terminology is the all-purpose index from Simmental. So that's one where you sell feeder or sell the calf product on the rail on a value-based grid, keep replacement heifers, so it puts economic weight across maternal and terminal traits both. A number of breeds have some kind of similarly constructed indexes, but you need to make sure that it's the right market endpoint and that it does have a replacement female component included. Second part of the question there is, would I use composite bulls? And I think a bit depends on the selection strategy and what the existing set of cows are to determine if we need purebred bulls for a while to kind of maximize our heterosis and breed complementarity progress in the short term, or if we can dive right into a set of composite bulls. So that one's a little more, I think composite bulls bring a lot of utility to our business in terms of delivering complementarity and heterosis in an easy package, but depending on suitability for size and application.
Thanks, Bob. Maybe just quickly, there was a question, within a breed, should sale catalogs filter lots by terminal versus maternal or some other method to make selection easier on buyers?
I think that'd be a great strategy, right? And going through and identifying as a seed stock vendor, here's a group of calving ease bulls. And we tried, at least at K-State, at our bull sale, kind of pin the bulls that way by outcome. So, if somebody's looking for a Cavanese Angus bull, they were all kind of in one spot. You didn't have to go kind of wander around and find individuals. And so I think that's a really great strategy of helping your customer find the genetics, and helping coach them, what's your circumstance? What are you doing? And get them pointed the right way. Great idea.
And then final question for the day, again to you, Bob. Somebody hears advice to manage low heritability traits while selecting for high heritability traits. What are your thoughts on that general advice?
Yeah, good question. And I'm sort of if it's a long-term thing, then we got to select for it today, or we're never going to get to where we need to go. And so, I think the management of the low heritability stuff requires both selection and management. We'll use maybe fertility as an example, right? So sustainability or cow rebreeding, we know has huge economic importance to the cow herd, but it's influenced by other higher heritability traits like cow size, for example, or lactation. We should simultaneously work all those fronts towards an optimum, and recognize that our management also plays a role, particularly in short run expression of fertility. And so you got to kind of keep all the pieces at play if you want to make long-term progress.
Great, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think the notion that selection and management are mutually exclusive, of course, is false. There's no reason why you can't practice selection, but then also implement improved management strategies. Certainly appreciate everyone hanging in here with us today. Very much appreciate the first two speakers of this year's webinar session. Session 2 is next week, October 9th, again at noon Central. Two speakers, Dr. David Lallman, will talk about the effects of milk and mature size on feed intake and cow cost. And then I'll wrap up that session with talking about the making of selection decisions based on individual breeding objectives, recognizing that there isn't always a tool perhaps at your disposal offered to do that. And so what are the different choices? So again, sincerely thank everyone for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you next week.